A misjudged mess, the worst Shakespeare production at the National Theatre for at least a decade. A dud, an unfortunate failure, a real mess, a stinker. Macbeth at the National Theatre has received some of the worst reviews in a long time, including a 1-star review in What's on Stage. Most rated it 2 stars, only a brave few gave it more than 2. So what didn't they like? Well, 2 words crop up more than any others: Rufus Norris. He's the director of Macbeth, and he's also the National Theatre's artistic director. The machetes were out for him. He must have felt like Macbeth did when Burnham Forest came to Dunserdane, and quite a few of the forest of critics noted his lack of experience in directing Shakespeare. Now, given the hugely successful Shakespearean productions of his predecessor Nicholas Hytner, now wowing them with Julius Caesar down the road at the Bridge Theatre, the phrase hard act to follow comes to mind. The first problem was that he had, many felt, no understanding of the play. He places his Macbeth in some kind of post-apocalyptic urban setting. The Telegraph wrote, "If a director does decide to go into modern-day apocalyptic mode, they can face a losing battle, as here, defining what is being fought over, why attention is paid to hierarchies, and how any of it matters." And the Stage said, "Where are we exactly? What sort of society is this? And how did people end up here? It's never made clear. Conceptually, it's a dismaying muddle." Spectator agreed. "Everything is confusing here." And Quentin Letts in the Daily Mail spluttered, "Childish, tokenistic, muddled. This show is laughably unmoving. They splosh masses of Kensington gore, but it manages to be bloodless, feeble." Sunday Times said, "What it should never feel like is lacklustre, turgid, somnolent." Evening Standard complained, "There's no compelling new take here on Shakespeare's interesting questions of tyranny and masculinity." And Variety said, "Norris has taken a play best compressed into a taut psychological drama and blown it up into something operatically overblown." To be fair, the Independent didn't hate it. "I've seen far worse than this," which is what's sometimes called damning with faint praise. So what else did Rufus Norris do to upset the critics? Well, if he didn't understand what Shakespeare was getting at, he also dissed the bard's poetry. "In more minor cuts and rewrites, metre counts for nothing," complained the Financial Times. "It's brutally truncated," said What's on Stage. "Its great moral debate about the corrupting effects of evil is entirely lost." Variety referred to unnecessary, almost arbitrary textual cuts. Observer talks of a slashed text that eviscerates the witch's speeches, no hubble bubble or eye of newt, and makes the drama blunter, more one-dimensional. Daily Mail wasn't happy from the start. "When shall we three meet again is one of the greatest opening lines of any play. Mr. Norris ditches that." The Guardian wrote, "While a play is not a poetry recital, this production seems indifferent to the rhythms of the language. It sacrifices its tonal contrasts and mysterious poetry." And not only did they think it sounded bad, they thought it looked bad. Ray Smith's ugly-to-behold set is dominated by an oppressive backdrop of raven-black hangings, said the Telegraph. And that word ugly comes up a few times. It was aggressively ugly, said the Stage. What's on Stage found it ugly to look at. Daily Mail called it a low-lit mess engulfed by blunt grottiness. Guardian found it harsh to look at, lacking in light and shade. The set offended some critics so much they couldn't keep their eyes off it, thus subverting Shakespeare's classic work. "The play struggles to rise above the sheer Stygian ghastliness," said the Times. "These distressing visual details aren't just nasty to look at, they undermine the story," said the Spectator. Not everyone agreed. Sunday Times thought it had a marvellous look. Radio Times praised the bold production design. And the Independent said, "Norris's production excels in atmosphere and visuals. It's dark." So you have this big dark set, and here's the next problem. It's in a big theatre. Now, arguably, this is not Rufus Norris's fault. He's inherited the cavernous Olivier, but then again, he chose to place Macbeth, a play whose themes of conspiracy and paranoia and domesticity probably work best in a more confined space. And here it is, in the biggest space the National has to offer. Ray Smith's black pleated walls, bin-bag cliffs engulf the action on the huge Olivier stage, said the Observer. And LondonTheatre.co.uk thought the scale of the production mitigates against the domestic intensity of much of the drama. Now, you might have thought the stars would redeem it. Rory Kinnear and Anne-Marie Duff are two of our finest actors, and in Rory Kinnear you have someone with a brilliant track record of playing great Shakespearean roles. And to an extent they did, but even though most critics liked their acting, quite a few didn't like their interpretations, especially Rory Kinnear's Macbeth. Here's what they said about this poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage. Rory Kinnear, one of our finest comic actors, never quite convinces as the driven, ambitious Thane. He's too dithering, nervy and jumpy. That was the Sunday Times. Daily Mail thought him unexceptional, and the Observer said, Kinnear is a martial, not a meditative presence, too robust to seem deeply disturbed. Stage said, in the past, he's been an eloquent Hamlet and a bullish envy-drenched Iago. He tackles Macbeth with the same clarity of delivery, but never digs beneath his skin. This latter point's echoed by others. Guardian said he never takes us inside Macbeth's head, and What's on Stage agreed, saying he does little to convey the conscience-stricken inwardness that makes the character so complex. There's not enough sense of the dense geography of Macbeth's inner life, said the Radio Times, and continued, we don't get the feeling here that his Macbeth is a great soul laid low by baser instincts, more an exasperated middle manager. Spectator had a similar thought. There's no trace of poetry, grandeur or mystery about him, but he'd be ideal casting as the tetchy manager of an Amazon warehouse. In fact, there's more from that Spectator writer. His voice is dark, rich and characterful, but he has few other assets. Physically, he's suburban, a bit bald, slightly stooping, with a faint beer gut and pinched narrow frame. In other contexts, this would be body shaming, but we can take his point. Rory Kinnear's Macbeth is an ordinary guy. Exeunt magazine had the same impression. Rory Kinnear plays Macbeth as the bloke down the pub, making some of the most famous monologues in the history of theatre sound as dramatically intense as a food order. Not everybody was unhappy with Rory Kinnear. BroadwayWorld.com said he showed real existential angst and was as clear-spoken and intelligent with verse as always. So what about Anne-Marie Duff? Well, she came in for less stick than Rory Kinnear, but the Observer did say Duff is precise, guarding against her own fragility, but lacks the fire that usually makes her so memorable. BroadwayWorld.com said Anne-Marie Duff's Lady Macbeth feels half-formed, and Variety was even less impressed. Duff all but goes missing. That said, many critics did like the acting of both Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth. Neither of these fine, fierce and always ferociously intelligent actors disappoints, said LondonTheatre.co.uk. And the Radio Times enthused about the clarity of delivery and line reading that makes the text sing. And quite a few singled out Anne-Marie Duff. Financial Times said she makes every word vibrate with high-tension significance. And The Guardian, which frankly didn't find much else to like, said she lives vividly in the moment. So there you have it. The critics full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow will tell whether ticket sales and indeed Rufus Norris's reputation are badly affected. I can say that when I saw it, the audience reacted well. There was no polite round of applause. There was strong clapping and some cheering, so word of mouth may yet prevail. Did any critic give Macbeth at the National Theatre more than 2 stars? Well, yes. Financial Times, Independent, Radio Times, The Eye, London Theatre website, to name but a few, gave it 3 stars. One lone voice even gave it 4 stars. That was a certain 1 Minute Theatre.Reviews. What can I say? I liked the dystopian setting. I thought the poetry was beautifully spoken. And I loved Rory Kinnear's portrait of Macbeth as an ordinary man in lawless times. I found it interesting to see the themes of Macbeth played out not in a war for a mighty kingdom, but in the kind of nasty modern war over a destroyed city, such as we've seen in Syria and Bosnia. I did think it would be better in a more confined space, and there was a certain lack of tension at the end, but I really hope that the massed ranks of critics advancing on Rufus Norris's Macbeth don't put people off this Scottish play for our times.